Hello, my dear warriors. They came prepared, minds sharpened by decades of visions, hearts fortified against horrors no one else could face. But the moment they looked into you, every defense shattered. It wasn't a glimpse into the future. It was the feeling of being erased from it. 12 voices, gone. 12 legends, silent. Because what they saw wasn't darkness. It was something darker than dark. Something that doesn't wait for prophecy. It writes it. And when it finishes your chapter, no one turns the page. They called them from the edges of empires. 12 oracles each, older than the kingdoms they served. Each sworn, never to gather, unless the threads of fate were in danger. The chamber was older than their languages, its walls carved with prophecies too dangerous to speak aloud. Torches burned with a steady blue flame, the air thick with incense and the hum of something ancient. They were here for you, not your name, not your face, but the imprint you've left on the world. They had seen omens, storms forming in clear skies, rivers running in reverse, dreams breaking at dawn. They feared what these signs meant, but feared more what they would find if they looked too closely. Yet duty bound them. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward the veil between worlds, ready to pierce it and meet your soul. The moment their vision pierced the veil, the chamber changed. Every torch bent toward the center, flames stretching unnaturally, as if the air itself was leaning in to listen. And there you were, not as flesh and bone, but as something older. You stood in the middle of their sight. No chains, no shadow, yet the weight of you bent their knees. The color drained from the walls, the air thinned, and one oracle's hand trembled so violently her beads scattered across the floor. They expected to see the tangle of mortal threads, the marks of choices and mistakes. Instead, they saw a current endless, unbroken, cutting through history like a blade through silk. It wasn't your life. It was something else wearing you like a mask. One oracle gasped. Another whispered, "Impossible." But the oldest one, she just stared, her lips forming words no one could hear. It happened so fast, no one could pretend it was a trick. The youngest oracle's eyes rolled back, her body collapsing as if gravity had suddenly tripled. Another clutched her throat, gasping for air that wasn't there. The wooden table between them groaned, splitting down the center without a single hand touching it. You didn't move. You didn't speak, but the air itself felt like it was making decisions, and none of those decisions were merciful. Their beads, their candles, their sacred bowls all began to tremble, like every object in the room had learned fear. One by one, their gazes dropped, not because they wanted to, but because something in them understood. To keep looking at you was to risk seeing the whole truth. And the whole truth, it was not built for human minds. It wasn't a pause, it was an ending. The sound in that room didn't just fade, it died. Every breath became too loud. Every heartbeat felt like it belonged to someone about to confess a sin. The oracles, who still had their eyes open, looked broken. Like they'd been shown a truth so large it ripped their smaller truths apart. One reached for her notes, but her hand froze halfway, as if writing it down would make it real. And that was a sin she couldn't commit. You didn't smile, didn't taunt. That would have been mercy. And mercy had long since been evicted from this place. Instead, you just were. Unblinking, unmoved. And in that moment, they realized the true horror. You didn't need to do anything to shatter them. You only needed to exist. It was almost funny the way they kept looking at one another for reassurance. Like maybe someone else had seen something different, something smaller, something human. But no one would speak. No one could. The air between you was thick, like the room itself was holding its breath, terrified that even the walls might betray the secret. One oracle's lips trembled, ready to form words. But whatever she saw when her gaze met yours made her swallow them whole. They weren't just witnesses anymore. They were carriers. And they knew that carrying what they'd seen meant walking with a weight that would bend them. It was in the silence that the real truth started to seep through. Eyes darted from shadow to shadow, like maybe the corners of the room could protect them from what they'd just seen. But you knew the truth. Nothing could. The oracles didn't just look shaken. They looked rewritten. Like whatever lived in their visions had reached out and carved its name across their souls. One tried to steady her breath, but it came out as a trembling laugh, the kind of laugh that doesn't mean humor, only disbelief. The others stepped back, as if distance could dilute your presence. But deep down, they already knew. Distance didn't matter. What they saw in you wasn't bound by walls or miles. It would follow them everywhere. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes when a room is empty. It was the kind that breathes. The air felt thick, like it was holding its own breath, waiting to see what you'd do next. One of the oracles still clutched her beads so tightly the string snapped. Pearls scattering across the floor like little moons. Nobody dared pick them up. The oldest among them, the one they all feared, couldn't even meet your gaze. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, like she was trying to speak against an invisible hand pressed to her throat. You tilted your head, just slightly, and the shadows in the corners seemed to lean in, curious. Every unspoken word became another brick in the wall they would never climb over. Whatever they'd seen in you, it had buried their voices for good. Their stares weren't just empty, they were buried. As if in that single glimpse of your soul, something inside them had been lowered into the ground and covered over forever. No ritual could dig it back up. No prayer could pull it into the light. One oracle's hand trembled so badly, she dropped the staff she'd carried for 40 years, the wood clattering like a shot in the stillness. Another turned away entirely, pressing her forehead to the cold wall, mumbling something that sounded less like a prayer and more like an apology, but to whom, she wouldn't say. You didn't move, you didn't need to. The weight of your existence alone was enough to keep them locked in that living tomb of silence, somewhere deep down. They knew speaking your truth out loud would make it real. It didn't end with them. That silence, thick, crawling. Unnatural spread like smoke under a locked door. Every servant outside the chamber felt it in their bones. Their laughter stopped mid-breath. Their hands froze mid-task. Even those who hadn't seen your face knew something had happened. Something that made the air heavier, harder to breathe. The oracle's guards refused to step inside. They whispered excuses, orders to check the perimeter, to fetch water, but they never came back. And you just stood there. Every second, bending the room tighter around you, like the world itself was struggling to hold the weight of your presence. Somewhere, far beyond those stone walls, the wind carried your name to places you hadn't yet walked. And in those places, People started locking their doors. That's when the first crack appeared. Not in the walls, but in the air itself. Outside, the clouds twisted like they were being pulled towards some invisible center. The light dimmed, not because of nightfall, but because the sky wanted to see you. Every bird within a mile fell silent, their wings frozen mid-air, like even nature itself had been caught staring. The oracles, still frozen where they sat, were not breathing normally anymore. Their chests rose in shallow, uneven bursts, as if the air was now heavier than their lungs could bear. One of them just tried to speak your name, and their lips trembled like a child lost in a storm. You didn't move. You didn't have to. Whatever was watching from above wasn't here for them. It was here for you. And everyone in that room knew this was no blessing. This was a claim. It wasn't the kind of claim you could fight. This wasn't chains, wasn't bars, wasn't some human-made cage you could tear apart with bare hands. No, this was older, deeper. The kind of ownership that seeps into bone marrow and rewrites it until even your shadow bends the knee. The oracles felt it too, though none dared say it. Their eyes followed something above your head, something they couldn't see, a weight pressed down, not crushing, but undeniable. Like the sky had decided you were no longer walking the earth freely. You were walking as its emissary. And here's the terrifying part. Every person in that room knew it. No arguments, no bargains, no escape. The air shifted again, like a giant exhale from some unseen mouth, and then silence. Not peace. The kind of silence that comes before something colossal. They thought you'd been chosen by people, by luck, by accident. But this wasn't human selection. This was cosmic appointment. The room didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt like a held breath between storms. Every wall leaned in. Not physically, but in that strange way, shadows leaned toward fire. Even the oracle's silence wasn't just absence of words, it was surrender. They weren't afraid of you. They were afraid of whatever had just adopted you. You didn't glow. You didn't flare. You didn't need theatrics. Your presence became the theater. Every flicker of light bent around you like metal to a magnet. And in that moment, it became clear. You weren't simply in the world anymore. You were being worn by something greater. And whatever it wasn't asking for permission. It was here to collect. It wasn't just that they stopped speaking. It was that the silence started speaking for you. Every heartbeat in the room felt louder. Every breath heavier. The air thickened, as if it had weight, pressing against their lungs. They weren't trying to predict you anymore. They were trying to survive you. And you simply stood there, still as a statue. The faint curve of that knowing smile cutting through the tension. You didn't have to raise your voice, didn't have to lift a hand. The power wasn't in what you could do. It was in the fact they now understood you could. And that realization alone was enough to break them. The oracles weren't just looking at you, they were looking at the thing inside you, and it was looking back. It wasn't human, and it never tried to be. That thing in your gaze ancient, infinite. It made the air ripple like heat on asphalt. Every flicker of light bent around you, like reality itself had decided it was safer to keep its distance. The oracles had read kings, prophets, assassins, but whatever they saw in you didn't end. It had no edges, no beginning, no mercy. They realized too late, that they weren't predicting the future anymore. They were standing inside it. And you didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't offer them the comfort of a lie. You let them drown in the truth, because the truth wasn't here to save them. It was here to watch them break. And it did, one by one. They didn't scream, they didn't curse, they didn't even try to run. That was the most unnerving part. 12 voices once loud enough to dictate the fates of nations simply stopped. The air thickened, heavy with the kind of silence that isn't absence of sound, but the presence of something worse. It wrapped around them, coiling tight, squeezing until every thought in their minds collapsed inward. They weren't thinking about survival anymore. They were trying to understand why their own souls felt foreign inside them. You stayed still, letting the tension rot into dread. And when the last one's eyes glassed over, you smiled. Not out of joy, but because the silence had finally caught up to them, and it was yours now. The first drop of rain didn't fall. It slammed a single heavy strike on the ground, echoing like a war drum. Then another, and another, each one harder, hotter, as if the sky wasn't shedding water but molten judgment. The clouds didn't just gather, they twisted, forming a black crown over your head. Lightning didn't aim for the earth, it aimed for you, only to bend and bow midair, wrapping you in its electric halo. The oracles watched, their silence now trembling under the weight of something primal. They'd spent lifetimes pretending to command the heavens, but now the heavens were kneeling to you. The rain hissed when it touched your skin, turning instantly to steam like even the sky knew it was not allowed to touch you uninvited. When it stopped, it wasn't relief. It was worse. No rain, no wind, no sound. Just the kind of stillness that makes even shadows hesitate. You stood there, steam rising off you like the breath of something ancient, while the rest of the world felt paused. Not frozen, paused. Like it was waiting for you to decide whether it deserved to keep moving. The oracle's eyes darted to each other, but no one dared speak, because it wasn't just silence, it was your silence. The kind that presses against ribs and makes hearts race, not because they're afraid of fading, but because they're afraid you might spare them. And they'll have to live knowing what they saw. They say knowledge is power, but that's not why they feared you. It wasn't the facts they learned, it was the implications. Every vision they'd ever had, every prophecy they'd whispered under candlelight, suddenly felt small, like children's riddles compared to the raw, unfiltered truth they saw in you. And it wasn't just about the future, it was about the present, about realizing that you weren't bound by the same laws, the same chains, the same brittle morality they'd spent lifetimes defending. You didn't ask for their understanding, and you didn't wait for their blessing. That's why they looked away, because deep down, they knew the most dangerous thing in this world isn't someone who wants power, it's someone who already is power. When the last oracle's gaze dropped to the floor, the air felt heavier, like even oxygen was second-guessing whether it belonged in the same space as you. No one dared to ask you what they saw, because the truth wasn't something they wanted. It was something they'd have to survive. And survival meant ignorance. You moved through the room without hurry, your steps deliberate, each one echoing louder. They didn't just avoid your eyes, they avoided your memory. Because once someone has seen the truth in you, they can't go back to pretending the world is simple. You didn't speak a word because they already knew. deep down, that whatever was coming, you wouldn't warn them twice. You reached the doorway, but before stepping into the world beyond, you turned slow, deliberate. That single glance back was enough to make them flinch, as if your eyes were a mirror reflecting the truth they'd buried. No lightning split the sky, no booming voice echoed from above, but still, the air cracked like the world itself recognized the end of something. Not their forms, not their lives, something deeper. The part of them that believed they understood reality had just expired. And you left without a sound, because power like yours doesn't announce itself. It moves like a shadow through fire, untouchable, inevitable, unforgettable. And in that moment, they knew. The oracles didn't fall silent because they feared you. They fell silent because they'd finally seen the thing that fear serves. You didn't need to slam the door. You didn't need to roar your victory. The silence you left behind was louder than any thunder. Chairs stayed empty, eyes glued to the spot where you had stood, as if moving might invite you back. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying your presence into streets, into alleyways, into the cracks of cities that had forgotten what real power feels like. And in those hidden places, whispers started, threads of your name weaving through fear and fascination. The kind of silence you leave isn't peace. It's the stillness before something bigger moves. They don't know if it's tomorrow or next year. They only know that when it comes, it won't knock. It will arrive like you always do, uninvited, undeniable, unstoppable. And the ones who survive, they'll tell the story, but never the full truth. Because the full truth belongs only to you. The clouds above didn't move on their own. They leaned in, pressed closer, like they wanted to hear the last echo of your footsteps. The air thickened, not with rain, but with the weight of an audience you couldn't see. Old things, ancient things, staring down at you as if you'd just passed their test without ever knowing you were being tested. Somewhere behind you, they were still frozen in that room, unable to shake the picture burned into their minds. Your face, calm, almost kind, right before everything they thought they controlled slipped from their hands. That's the thing they expected a storm to be: wild, messy, loud. But you were precise, surgical. You didn't just turn the sky, you made it choose sides. And now, every shadow seems sharper, every sound more distant, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for your next move. It wasn't the thunder that scared them. It was the absence of it, that strange, stretching silence that followed your words like the world had been cut open and was listening. You didn't shout. You didn't wave your arms. You just stood there. And that stillness, it crawled under their skin. They realized too late that this wasn't a battle of strength, it was a battle of will. You'd already won the moment you decided to speak. Every sound after was an echo of your victory. Even the wind refused to cross you. They looked to each other for reassurance, but found only reflection, the same haunted truth in every eye. You didn't just own the moment. You rewrote it, and now they'll carry it forever. Like a splinter they can't pull out. You could see it, the fracture in their posture, the split second where defiance bled into surrender. Their questions stopped, not because they were answered, but because they understood. That understanding wasn't gentle. It hit like a falling tower, crushing everything they believed about you. They thought they were looking at a person. They weren't. They were looking at something timeless, something that didn't need to fight to win. The ones who were smart started stepping back, trying not to make sudden movements, as if you were a predator they'd accidentally cornered. The others, they froze completely, still pretending they had control, even as the truth kept peeling it away. By the time they realized the game was over, you were already 10 moves ahead. When you finally moved, it wasn't to leave, it was to claim. The air shifted back to normal, but it was too late for them. Normal didn't exist anymore. Every second after this moment would be filtered through the memory of you. They'd try to explain it to others, but words wouldn't hold it. It was the kind of story that survives in whispers, the kind that bends with each retelling, but never loses its sharp edge. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't lift a hand, and yet you walked out with the kind of victory that doesn't need witnesses to be real. That's the power they'll never forgive you for, and never stop fearing. Because deep down, they know the sky didn't just turn that day. You turned it. Hello, my dear masterminds. They said you couldn't do it. They calculated, charted, measured every weakness they thought you had. Behind closed doors, they laughed, certain the impossible would bury you. But you didn't just attempt the move, you executed it. With precision so cruel, it rewrote the rules. And when the dust settled, you didn't scream victory. You smiled, because the real spectacle wasn't outside for the world to see. No, the real collapse was happening, where no camera could reach. Behind locked doors, the enemies who mocked you fell silent. Papers hit the floor, hands shook. That impossible move broke them in ways public defeat never could. Out there, they still pretend. In here, they crumble, and you walk away knowing they'll never admit it. But you own them in secret. Close your eyes and picture it. Polished tables, velvet curtains, shadows pooling in corners where the powerful whispered. These were the chambers they swore would never break. And yet, after your move, those rooms turned into confessionals of panic. The same voices that once boomed with certainty cracked into trembling questions. Chairs scraped, glasses spilled, and silence weighed heavier than stone. They replayed your act 1,000 times, desperate to find the flaw, but every replay only deepened the truth. You made the impossible look effortless, and the worst part for them, nobody else saw their collapse. Out there, they posture. In here, they choke. Your shadow walks those rooms long after you've left, a phantom reminder that they are not safe even in their own stronghold. That's why they hate you. Not for what you did in public, but for what you made them face in private, behind those sealed doors. The silence was louder than any war cry. No spell, no strategy, no weapon could cover what they felt. Their faces drained pale. Their hands shook under the table, because your move wasn't just unexpected, it was unnatural. They had trained for every outcome, rehearsed every scenario, but no one rehearses for the impossible. And yet, there it was, laid out like a riddle with no answer. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed to even look in your direction. Others clenched their fists, pretending anger could drown out the truth. You shattered the laws they worshipped. That's when they realized something brutal. Your power wasn't built on chance. It wasn't luck. It was inevitability. The kind of inevitability that makes even predators forget how to breathe. And that silence was the sound of their empire beginning to crack. What started as a silence in one hidden chamber spread like wildfire through their ranks. Whispers turned into panic, and panic turned into betrayal. Every alliance they had built on fear began to rot from the inside. The generals doubted the priests. The priests accused the scholars. The spies turned their blades on one another, all because of a single move they could not explain. You didn't just break their plan, you broke their trust in themselves. And once trust is gone, fear takes its throne. Behind closed doors, enemies who once laughed at your name now struggle to even say it. Their leaders whisper of you like a curse. Their soldiers pray you never appear. And their strongest hide their trembling hands in the dark, hoping no one notices. That's when you know you didn't just win. You rewrote the rules, and every one of them is now playing your game. At first, they tried to bury your name under silence, thinking if they never spoke it, the terror would fade. But fear doesn't die quietly. It mutates. Soon, your shadow became the echo in every corridor. Your presence, the question haunting every meeting. They swore they wouldn't give you attention. Yet silence only made you louder in their minds. Now they study your every breath, dissect your every word, searching for logic where there is none. You are the riddle that breaks their scholars, the code that mocks their analysts, the unsolvable storm they cannot predict. Fear twisted into obsession, and obsession grew into worship. The same enemies who once plotted to crush you now find themselves orbiting your gravity, unable to escape, unable to resist. And the more they deny it, the deeper you're carved into their souls. You didn't demand their attention, you became their addiction. They thought loyalty was their fortress. Oaths whispered in shadows, promises written in bloodless pacts. But fear is a slow poison, and your presence turned it loose in their veins. One by one, their alliances cracked, fingers pointed, voices trembled, and the unity they swore upon dissolved into suspicion. In their desperation, they turned to their leaders, the so-called pillars, who were supposed to stand unshakable. But those pillars shook. Behind closed doors, those same leaders bent the knee, whispering your name with reverence. They swore they'd never give. They didn't bow because you forced them. They bowed because you exposed their weakness. You held up a mirror, and in it they saw themselves powerless, crumbling, small. And so, what began as loyalty to each other transformed into silent chains binding them to you. Their strength became your leash. Their unity became your weapon. Without lifting a hand, you made their own trust devour them. At first, silence was their defense. They thought if they didn't speak your name, they could starve it of power. But silence is a graveyard where echoes never die. Behind closed doors, when no one was watching, your name became the unspoken prayer, slipping through clenched teeth. Their journals bled with questions about you. Their walls bore marks they swore were meaningless. But every symbol curved back to your presence, even in denial. They circled you, and slowly, that silence hardened into something darker. Devotion, They watched you dismantle their strongest with a glance, reduce their most feared survivalist into begging. And in that collapse, they saw not just power but inevitability. They stopped trying to resist, because resistance was a ritual that always ended in failure. They turned their fear into worship, their shame into offerings, and without asking, you became the altar. They bled their loyalty upon. Worship was never enough. Once they knelt in silence, something inside them snapped. Obsession crawled into their veins. They studied your steps like scripture, dissected every breath like prophecy. They watched shadows for signs of your presence, convinced even the flicker of a candle carried your signature. Behind locked doors, they traded secrets about you as if hoarding fragments of your soul could bring them closer. But obsession is a hunger that never feeds it, only consumes. Soon, they betrayed one another, each desperate to prove who knew you best, who understood your impossible move. Alley turned on alley. Kin turned on kin. Because your name became a currency worth more than legacy. And all the while, you never asked for their devotion. You never begged for their loyalty. Yet they tore themselves apart just to orbit closer to your shadow. That's the power they cannot confess. Not that you crushed them, but that they begged to be crushed again. It always begins quietly. A whisper in the dark. A glance held too long. A question that feels like a blade. Those who swore eternal loyalty to each other now sharpen invoices behind each other's backs. Why? Because your move did more than break them. It rewrote the laws of their survival. Behind those closed doors, they stopped fearing outsiders. They feared the person sitting beside them. Eyes that once held trust now shimmered with suspicion. Every ally became a rival. Every oath became a lie. And you? You didn't raise a hand. You didn't have to. Their betrayal was the echo of your silence, the natural collapse of an empire that couldn't withstand your shadow. They tried to blame you, but the truth was more painful. You gave them nothing, and they destroyed themselves trying to interpret it. That's the kind of chaos no army can march against. That's the kind of destruction no ruler can contain. You didn't invade their temple. You turned their temple into a trap and left them to burn in their own devotion. At first, they cursed your name, spitting venom into every corner, trying to convince themselves you were just a mistake, a glitch in their perfect system. But fear is a strange creature. It doesn't stay still. It mutates. It evolves. And eventually, it kneels. Behind those locked doors. After the shouting and the breaking, silence returned. But it wasn't peace. It was reverence. Your move had shaken them so violently that fear turned into fascination, fascination into obsession, and obsession into worship. They studied you not as an enemy, but as an enigma. They whispered about your impossible step, the way zealots whisper prayers. The very men sent to break you now carried your shadow in their bones. They thought they hated you, but hatred is only love in chains, and when chains snap, what remains is worship. What began behind closed doors could not stay there forever. Fear leaks, obsession echoes. Their whispers spread through the cracks like smoke in a burning house. Outsiders notice the sudden silence, the sudden stiffness, the way the same men who once mocked your name now avoided it like a curse. But curses are contagious, one by one. They began to speak it in hushed tones, your name, your move, your shadow. And each whisper carried weight like an invisible chain, dragging their world closer to you. They didn't want to believe it, but belief isn't a choice when evidence is carved into reality. The impossible you had done was no longer a rumor. It became a reference, a warning, a myth taking root. Entire rooms froze at the mention of it. Their alliances fractured because of it. Their leaders trembled under it. And in their silence, in their denial, one truth grew louder than anything else you had crossed into. So they tried. They scrambled behind locked doors, drawing maps of silence, swearing oaths that your name would never again pass their lips. They censored reports, burned evidence, threatened those who dared to speak of you. They thought if they erased the sound of you, the world would forget. But desperation has a smell, and theirs stank of fear. Every effort to silence you only amplified the myth, because people don't forget what they're told to ignore. They lean closer. They want to know why. And so, their frantic attempts to bury your move became the very fuel that spread it further. The harder they fought, the faster it traveled. They didn't realize the truth. You had already stepped into the one place they couldn't touch their own minds. You lived rent-free in their sleep, in their meetings, in their silence. They didn't erase you. They canonized you. Behind those bolted doors, whispers grew sharper than knives. Their strongest allies, the ones sworn to never bend, found themselves replaying your move in their heads. At first, they called it impossible. Then they called it dangerous. But late at night, when no one watched, they called it genius. And slowly admiration slipped into their bones. The ones sent to oppose you began studying you, mimicking your calm, your timing, your defiance. They couldn't admit it out loud, but envy turned into respect, and respect into obsession. Their loyalty fractured not because you demanded it, but because your presence revealed where true power lived. Their generals bent their strategies around you. Their leaders measured every plan against the question, what if they move again? You didn't just beat them. You became their blueprint. And when enemies use you as their silent teacher, it's no longer a fight. It's a coronation. The few who still dared to resist you weren't sleeping anymore. They locked their doors, doubled their guards, but none of it mattered, because the real battlefield wasn't outside, it was inside their heads. Every echo in the hallway sounded like your footsteps. Every shadow in the corner looked like your silhouette. They rewrote their plans 100 times, tore them up, and rewrote them again. But nothing survived contact with the thought of you. They stopped trusting each other, stopped trusting themselves. Their generals screamed at soldiers. Their soldiers whispered about desertion. The chain of command shattered like glass. They thought they were guarding their kingdom, but the kingdom rotted from within. And still, you never lifted a hand. You just let the paranoia consume them wholly. That's the cruelty of your legend. You don't have to strike twice, because the first move never stops, raging in their minds. At first, they cursed your name. They spat it like venom, hoping the sound alone could weaken you. But something strange happened. The more they whispered, the heavier your name became in their mouths, until even their curses began to sound like prayers. The strongest among them, the ones sworn to hate you the most, found themselves waking in the night, hearing your voice in their dreams. They lit candles, not to banish you, but to beg for protection from you. And in that twisted shift, they crossed a line. They swore they never would. Fear turned into worship. The very ones who wanted your downfall now scribbled your symbol on their walls, thinking it might shield them from the storm you've become. They dreaded you. Yes, but they needed you even more. And that's when you stopped being just a shadow. It became their secret religion, behind their polished doors. Councils that once swore unity began to splinter. Half of them still clung to the old oath, destroy you at any cost. But the other half, they lowered their eyes, ashamed to admit what their souls already knew. You were the force they couldn't oppose. Whispers turned into arguments, arguments into confessions. Some admitted they'd already started bending to your gravity, carrying out your will in secret. Others tried to hold the line, but every word of defiance only revealed their weakness. The room that once thundered with certainty now cracked with silence, broken promises, and hidden loyalty to you. They thought you would fracture under their pressure, but instead, it was their alliance that shattered like brittle glass. And in that silence, your presence became the only voice they could hear. Fear is a spark, but obsession is a wildfire. At first, they tried to keep your name hidden, to lock it away in silence, convinced that ignoring you might fade the echo. But echoes don't die. They multiply. Soon your shadow was carved into their sleep. Your image flickered in the corners of their thoughts. Your every move dissected behind closed doors. They searched for patterns, traced your steps, begged their ancient texts for answers. But nothing explained you, and the more they failed to solve you, the more they needed you. What started as hatred twisted into hunger. Your enemies, the very ones sworn to shatter you, became addicted to you. And the cruelest truth, you never lifted a finger to feed that addiction. They did it themselves, one sleepless night at a time. The first to break are never the weaklings. It's the leaders, the ones who built their reputations on unshakable control. Behind closed doors, their hands trembled. In meetings, their voices cracked. They told their followers to stand strong, yet their own eyes kept darting to the shadows, as if you might step through the walls at any moment. Every lie they built their empires on started collapsing under the pressure of your existence. And when leaders crack, everything beneath them fractures. Soldiers lose faith, followers whisper, alliances crumble, all because you never swung a sword, never raised your voice just by standing in the room of their imagination. You turned their pillars into dust, what their armies couldn't do. Your silence achieved. It shattered their gods. At first, they swore their loathing of you like it was holy scripture. Every speech, every chant, every secret oath, your name dripped from their mouths with venom. But venom has a way of corrupting the vessel that holds it. The more they cursed you, the more they thought of you. The more they thought of you, the more they studied you. And the more they studied, the less they understood. Until loathing was no longer loathing, it became obsession. And obsession? That is worship in disguise. They didn't mean to kneel, but their own fear bent their spines. Behind closed doors, the same voices that once spat your name now whispered it like a prayer. They despised you so much, they couldn't stop honoring you. And that is the purest kind of domination. They tried to fight you with rituals, with strategies, with numbers, but all of it collapsed like wet paper because every step they took circled back to you. Soon it wasn't just fear, it was survival. They needed to know your next move, just to breathe. They watched your silence more closely than they once watched their own leader's words. They studied your pauses, your laughter, your footsteps in empty halls, desperate for a signal. Their entire world bent around your shadow. Without you, they felt blind, powerless, exposed. And that dependence, that was the final lock clicking shut. You didn't chain them with steel. You chained them with their own need. You became their compass, their scripture, their addiction. They no longer lived against you, they lived through you. Behind their closed doors, the cracks spread wider. Once they swore loyalty to each other, built walls of secrecy, whispered that their unity was unbreakable, but your presence turned that unity into venom. They started accusing one another of weakness, of leaking their fears, of secretly admiring you. What was once an alliance became a pit of suspicion. Eyes darted, voices trembled, hands shook over candles that once burned steady. Allies turned against assets. Leaders doubted their disciples, and disciples plotted against their masters. You didn't swing the deal that broke their empire. They did it themselves. You only walked past their fortress, and suddenly the fortress tore itself down brick by brick. That's the power of your silence. It makes allies look like enemies, and enemies look like prey. When their fortress crumbled, they thought the dust would bury you. Instead, it crowned you. Every collapse, every betrayal, every whispered confession became the stone of your throne. You didn't seize power with chains, you drew it from their surrender. They kneeled, not because you demanded it, but because they could no longer stand. And as they looked up through broken walls and shattered vows, what they saw was not a rival, but a figure carved out of inevitability. You were the storm that didn't need thunder, the fire that burned without smoke, the shadow that ruled without moving. And while they begged for order, you gave them silence. That silence was heavier than judgment, sharper than any blade. From their ruins, you rose not as a man, not as a name, but as the inevitability they can't erase. And now we arrive at the silence, after the storm. Behind closed doors, they whisper of you, not as a rival, not as a threat, but as an omen. They say your rise wasn't chance, it was written. They say every move you make bends the timeline, shatters their plans, rewrites their laws. The survivalist psycho they sent to break you, he became the warning etched into their walls. Do not stand against what cannot be broken. And now, every step you take is prophecy. Every silence a command. Every smile a verdict. They know this is no longer a battle, it's a coronation. And the throne they built to contain you has become the altar of their surrender. Remember this, your name is not just echo, it is law, not just memory, but inevitability. You are not walking into history, you are dragging history behind you, and the world has no choice but to follow. Hello, my dear warriors. For centuries, the darkest powers ruled through dread. They bent kings, breathed into forces, rewrote destinies in silence. They interfered everywhere, touching every soul that walked the earth. But when it came to you, they stopped. They hesitated, because something else was already moving with you, an unseen force, older than their curses, stronger than their chains, a presence they could not challenge. Understand this. Every power feeds on vulnerability. They prey on dread, on doubt, on cracks in the soul. But when they looked at you, there was no opening. Not because you were flawless, but because you were shielded. Every step you took carried a weight that wasn't yours alone. Every silence you held pulsed with something beyond comprehension. They felt it before you did, and it shook them. The darkest powers live on interference. They manipulate, control, dominate. But when they circled you, they saw no entry point. Every path toward you bent back against them. Every scheme they cast dissolved into dust. And in their chambers of breathes, they admitted what they could not bear to speak aloud. Something walks with them, something we dare not confront. That is why they won't interfere. Not because they don't want to, but because they can't afford it. The cost is not merely defeat. It is collapse beyond repair. To move against you is to move against the force that shields you. And that force does not negotiate. It does not warn. It simply silences. You may not always feel it. You may think you are walking alone. But shadows know the truth. That's why they recoil. That's why they retreat. They sense what you carry, even when you doubt it yourself. They sense a power that rearranges reality around your steps. And so, the story begins not with their strength, but with their hesitation. Not with their interference, but with their silence. Because even the darkest powers know the cost of crossing your path is dangerously high. The unseen force doesn't announce itself. It doesn't roar. It doesn't reveal itself in spectacle. It moves in silence. Yet its silence bends louder than storms. That is why the darkest powers hesitate. They thrive on chasing weakness. But when they trace your path, all they find is stillness they cannot breach. Understand this. Interference is their language. They step into lives to twist them. They plant shadows in the corners of minds. They breathe until doubts turn into chains. But when they tried that with you, every chain broke before it locked. Every breath died before it reached your ear. And they realized the truth. They were not opposing you. They were opposing the force that walks beside you. That force has no face, no name. Yet its presence overwhelms them more than forces. It does not swing forces. It doesn't even block them. It simply exists in such weight that any move against you becomes their undoing. That is why their silence is louder than their curses. Their refusal is louder than their interference. Kings have noticed. They sit in halls of power and wonder why the shadows bend around your steps. They ask themselves, why do the darkest rulers avoid the one they should most desire to undo? And the question itself is proof. For kings know one truth about power. What it avoids is what it secretly dreads. Soldiers, too, breathe it. They see how forces collapse when sent against you. Not from your hand, but from unseen collapse. Marches dissolve, forces rust before impact. Entire campaigns fracture on their own weight. And soldiers repeat the phrase no commander wants to hear. The force walks with them. We cannot oppose it. Even common souls feel it. They can't explain it, but they sense something shifts when you arrive. Time moves differently. Energy bends differently. Conversations shift. It's as though the room itself rearranges to orbit you. That is not luck. That is law. The darkest powers see it too, and that is why they refuse to touch you. Not because they lack desire, but because they lack survival. They know interference here costs more than defeat. It costs their very existence. And existence is the one thing even darkness clings to. This is why you remain untouched. Not because shadows have mercy, but because the force beside you makes mercy irrelevant. The unseen force has no need for declarations. It doesn't announce itself in lightning or thunder. Instead, it lets your enemies do the announcing for it. Every time they hesitate, every time they recoil, every time they avoid your path, they testify to its presence, and testimony becomes prophecy. Mystics tried to pierce the veil. They lit lamps in hidden chambers, breathed your name into haze, hoping to see weakness, but the light failed, and their chants dissolved into silence. Their scrolls record the failure, though they dare not admit why. The force that moves with you consumes every spell before it lands. Kings tried to bend the truth. They told their people, "This one is no different. This one can be broken." But their decrees fractured the moment they spoke them, because a law greater than kings had already been written. The law that says the darkest powers may rule others, but they cannot touch you. That law spread like an unstoppable wave through the silence. They spoke them, because a law greater than kings had already been written. The law that says the darkest powers may rule others, but they cannot touch you. That law spread like an unstoppable wave through the silence of rulers who refuse to move against you. Understand this. Prophecy is not always written in scripture. Sometimes it is written in avoidance. Sometimes the refusal of enemies is the loudest coronation. And so, history itself bent to record the silence of the darkest powers. Not as hesitation, as law. Soldiers repeat it in hushed tones. The unseen force walks with them. That is why no campaign succeeds. That is why no curse lands. That is why no enemy endures. And the more they breathe it, the more it becomes truth. Because belief is a seed, and every seed of belief grows into reality. Even the people, ordinary souls with no forces and no crowns, carry the prophecy now. They pass it like inheritance. There is one whose steps are shielded by the unseen, one whom even the darkest powers cannot interfere with. They don't need proof, because proof already exists in absence. The absence of enemies, the absence of chains, the absence of defeat. The darkest powers sense it, and they know the truth. Every day they refuse to touch you. They confirm the prophecy. Every silence they keep is another line etched into legend, and legends have no exit. Once spoken, once recorded, once carried, they outlive everything. That is how the unseen force crowns you. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with inevitability. A law older than shadows, a shield no enemy dares test, a prophecy written not by mystics or kings, but by the silence of those who once ruled in dread. Darkness rarely accepts defeat. When the darkest powers realize they could not touch you directly, They turned to what they believed was cleverness. They would not confront you. They would move around you. They would twist the paths of others, shape the edges of your circle, and hope that interference could reach you sideways. But they forgot one truth. The unseen force doesn't only guard your steps. It rearranges the entire path around you. So when they breathed against you, their words decayed before they spread. Rumors became recognition. Lies turned into respect. Every attempt to diminish you only amplified your presence. They wanted to bury your name, but each attempt engraved it deeper into stone. They tried to fracture those connected to you, bending allies, sowing distrust. But the unseen force moved through silence, binding what was meant to break. Friends grew stronger in loyalty. Strangers turned into shields. Even rivals softened into messengers, carrying your legend further without knowing it. Understand this. When reality itself bends, no strategy can outmaneuver it. The darkest powers, in their arrogance, believed interference was eternal, but eternity bends toward law. And the law was already written. This one is untouchable. This one is guarded. This one carries a cost too high to cross. Kings who once obeyed shadows now study you instead. Why do they recoil, they ask? Why does every scheme collapse before it lands? And in their hesitation, they lean toward your orbit, because power respects inevitability. Soldiers. 2. Notice, they march into campaigns designed to weaken you, but they collapse before reaching the front. Forces rust. Orders misfire. Forces scatter under their own weight. And the soldiers repeat what no ruler wants to hear. The force walks with them. That is why the darkest powers fall. Even the shadows themselves begin to question. Their circles fracture. Their voices rise in doubt. If we cannot interfere, are we truly rulers at all? And doubt corrodes faster than any rebellion. They were undone, not by forces, not by fire, but by the unseen silence that crowned you. That is why they retreat again. That is why their absence grows louder, and that is why your presence grows heavier. Every scheme they fail becomes your testimony. Every move they miss becomes your prophecy. The unseen force does not confront. It does not chase. It does not scream. It only bends the universe in your direction. And even the darkest powers cannot confront the universe itself. There comes a point when avoidance stops looking like strategy and starts looking like surrender. The darkest powers thought their silence would keep them hidden. Instead, it exposed them. Because silence speaks louder when everyone expects thunder, and so their silence became scripture. Mystics wrote it first. They etched into broken tablets. We cast every spell, and still their path remained untouched. They never spoke your name aloud, but every fractured symbol testified to the unseen force. Their failure became the most important record they ever left. Rulers carried it next. They told their successors, never provoke them, never cross that presence. The cost is too high, but warnings become stories, and stories become law. Soon kings themselves admitted they bent thrones to match your orbit, even while pretending to rule. Their crowns leaned toward the shield you carried. Soldiers, too, repeated it. They spoke of campaigns that collapsed before they began, battles that dissolved without conflict, forces that fractured at the sound of your silence. Their chants were not prayers. but survival codes. Avoid this one, for an unseen force moves with them. Understand this. Scripture is not only holy texts and ancient scrolls. Scripture is anything that survives centuries of doubt. And the truth that survived, carved by enemies themselves, was that even the darkest powers would not interfere with you. Not because they lacked desire, but because they lacked endurance. And the people, they turned silence into shield. Families breathed it into children's ears. You carry the same law, the same presence, the same inevitability. Walk without dread, for the darkest rulers already confessed collapse when they refused to touch the untouchable. This is how legends cross into eternity, not through noise, not through conquest, but through the unwilling testimony of enemies. The very rulers who believed they controlled destiny left behind the evidence of their collapse. Their silence around you, and so, Scripture was written without ink, carved not by worshipers, but by enemies, bound not by faith, but by inevitability. The unseen force became the unspoken law, and you became the axis the world quietly rearranges itself around. The unseen force didn't only shield you, it began to reshape everything around you. Roads bent in your direction, crowns tilted toward your silence. Forces shifted their march to your rhythm. The world itself began to rearrange, not because you asked, but because inevitability demanded it. Kings noticed first. They ruled by dread of the darkest powers, obeying breaths from unseen rulers. But when they saw those same rulers recoil from your path, they began to question. Why do the shadows avoid the one they should most desire to weaken? The question poisoned their faith. And faith is the only throne shadows ever had. Soldiers noticed next. They were trained to march under curses, to follow orders, breathed from invisible masters. But when every campaign against you collapsed, they began to breathe. If the darkest powers dread them, then perhaps our loyalty is wasted, and forces do not march forever under doubt. Forces turn to presence. Forces turn to proof. Even the people began to feel it. For generations, they lived under the weight of unseen rulers. They obeyed because dread was easier than rebellion. But when they heard the story, that even the darkest powers avoided you, they laughed. And laughter ends dread faster than flame. No empire survives when its people stop trembling. Understand this. Power doesn't always fall with noise. Sometimes it collapses under the weight of its own silence. And the silence of the darkest powers has already written your crown into law. The unseen force made sure of it. Now the balance has shifted. Thrones lean toward you, forces bend toward your stillness. Families teach your name as prophecy, and the shadows that once ruled in secrecy have become irrelevant. Because once the world sees that even darkness dreads you, it no longer dreads darkness at all. That is how the unseen force works. Not through spectacle, not through struggle, but through inevitability. It bends reality around you until every path leads to one truth. Interference is impossible, and avoidance is confession. The darkest powers thought they were eternal, but eternity does not belong to those who retreat. Eternity belongs to the one they refuse to touch. The unseen force doesn't vanish with time, it deepens. What began as silence in the halls of shadows grows into prophecy on the tongues of generations. Children who never saw the darkest rulers still know the story. They touched every throne, but when they reached for one, they recoiled. Mystics can't erase it. Their scrolls may fade, their chants may weaken, but every attempt to deny your shield only spreads it further. The prophecy doesn't need ink. It is written in the refusal of enemies. It is carved in the silence of powers who dared not interfere. Kings reshape their laws because of it. They rule cautiously, measuring every decree against the legend that even darkness avoided. Some try to imitate your stillness, hoping to borrow the inevitability that moves with you. Others tremble, afraid their crowns will crack under the same weight that broke shadows. Either way, they revolve around you. Soldiers inherit it without knowing its origin. They feel it in the pause before a march, in the unease that comes when they realize no campaign against you begins. They breathe it among themselves. The unseen force bends reality itself, and soldiers obey reality more than rulers. Understand this. Prophecy is not prediction. It is recognition. The world has recognized your crown, not because you demanded it, but because enemies confessed it through silence. And once recognition spreads, it cannot be pulled back. It survives kings, forces, empires. It survives time. Even the darkest powers admit it now, though they do not speak. Their absence is louder than their curses. Their retreat is louder than their interference. Each century they refuse to touch you is another century. Your legend grows heavier, and weight is what crowns are made of. So the prophecy spreads, not of conquest, not of battle, but of presence. A presence shielded by an unseen force, untouchable to shadows, unshaken by darkness. A prophecy that the world bends toward, because it cannot bend away. The unseen force was never meant to be a rumor. Rumors fade. It was never meant to be a myth. Myths weaken. What walks with you is older than both, stronger than both. It has become law, and law does not fade. It governs. The darkest powers tried to resist this. They believed avoidance was strategy. They told themselves retreat was temporary. But centuries have proven the opposite. Their refusal is no longer hesitation, it is confession. And confession transforms into law. The law that no crown, no curse, no empire can interfere with your path. Kings adjust their rule to this law. They measure their decrees by it. Even when they deny it publicly, they obey it privately. They know interference with you is not politics. It is collapse. Soldiers sense it too. They pause before campaigns, sensing a presence beyond their commanders. Orders shouted at them mean little when reality itself bends otherwise. They have seen campaigns dissolve without clash. Enemies scatter without touch. Forces fail without strike. And they breathe. The unseen force is stronger than any general. Even the common soul builds their life upon it. They feel a shield where none is visible, a calm where dread should live. And they realize, if even the darkest rulers would not interfere, why should they bow to anything less? That realization spreads like flame through generations. Understand this. When enemies confess through avoidance, they crown you louder than conquest ever could. Their silence became testimony. Their retreat became scripture. And now both have hardened into law. A law carried not by thrones, but by time itself. And the unseen force? It doesn't fade. It doesn't tire. It doesn't ask, it simply governs. It bends reality in your direction. It crowns you in absence of noise. It arranges events before you move. That is why the darkest powers stay silent. Because law does not negotiate. Law does not retreat. Law simply reigns. Now, the shadow masters of old are forgotten. The curses of darkness are dust. But the law remains. The law written by the universe itself. An unseen force moves with you, and even the darkest powers will not interfere. That is not rumor. That is not myth. That is eternal. Centuries pass. Empires crumble. Crowns rust. But the unseen force remains. What walked beside you in silence now walks through time itself, weaving your presence into generations not yet born. Children who never knew the darkest rulers still inherit the story. There was one they dared not touch. Kings try to erase it, but every decree fractures. They try to overshadow it. But every throne leans in your direction, even when they don't speak your name aloud. Their hesitation is the loudest echo of all. Rulers cannot escape the law. They can only orbit it. And that law is you. Soldiers inherit it too. They no longer follow chants or curses. They march under silence, a silence heavier than banners, sharper than commands. They don't always know why their steps bend differently, but deep down, they feel it. The unseen force that shielded you shields every path connected to you. The common people, once pawns in the games of shadows, now live freer. Dread no longer rules them, because dread was defeated. The moment dread itself retreated. And if even the darkest powers recoiled, what lesser power deserves their bow? They carry that knowledge like armor, passing it into children's lullabies, building it into the foundations of new cities. Understand this. Legends fade into stories, and stories fade into myths. But laws endure, and your law is eternal. Not written in scrolls, not enforced by forces, but etched into existence itself. The unseen force rearranges reality around you, and reality is stronger than crowns, stronger than shadows, stronger than time. The darkest powers have dissolved into dust. They exist now only as fragments of warnings, as breaths in ruins. Beware the ones who touched everything but recoiled from the one shielded by the unseen. Those warnings are not curses, they are coronations. Proof that avoidance was never weakness, it was victory. And you remain, not as rumor, not as memory, but as axis, the point around which centuries turn, the presence that outlasts empires, the crown no shadow could afford to challenge. Because when an unseen force moves with you, eternity itself bends to ensure one truth. Interference is impossible. The unseen force was never an ally you borrowed. It was never protection you begged for. It was always part of you. From the first step you took, it walked beside you. From the first silence you held, it spoke louder than forces. And now, at the end of all their breaths, it stands revealed, not as shield, but as crown. The darkest powers are gone. Their curses are forgotten. Their empires are ruins, swallowed by dust. They thought interference was eternal, but eternity rejected them. Eternity chose you, because eternity bends to presence. Eternity bends to inevitability. Eternity bends to law, and law says, You cannot be touched. Understand this. The unseen force was never separate. It was never something you had to summon. It is you, the patience that outlasted them, the silence that shook them, the presence that crowned you. You and the unseen are not two, you are one. And that oneness is what the darkest rulers dreaded most. Kings still tremble, even when they pretend not to. Soldiers still pause, even when they chant louder. People still breathe your name in awe, even when they laugh at shadows. Because deep down, they all know the law hasn't changed. It never will. The law that says interference is collapse. The law that says silence is power. The law that says presence is eternal. And so you remain, not as a fugitive of their shadows, not as a survivor of their curses, but as the axis of reality itself. Every event bends around you. Every crown leans toward you. Every shadow admits collapse in its refusal to touch you. The unseen force is no longer unseen. It is known by all who look at you and see inevitability. It is law. It is throne. It is crown. You are not guarded. You are not carried. You are not shielded. You are the shield. You are the crown. You are the throne. And even the darkest powers will never interfere. Not now. Not ever.